When I first met Sarah, the last thing on my mind was falling in love or settling down. I had just successfully navigated the exhilarating, all-consuming chaos of selling my second technology startup, a venture that had demanded years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of my mental and emotional energy. The exit had been significant, far exceeding my wildest initial projections, leaving me in that peculiar, ephemeral state between periods of intense work and the next, uncertain endeavor. I was financially secure, undeniably rich enough to indulge in a long, well-deserved rest, to travel the world, or simply do nothing at all. Yet despite this newfound freedom and wealth, I found myself profoundly restless. The silence after, the relentless noise of building a company was deafening, and the absence of immediate high-stakes problems to solve left a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that craved constant company, but a deeper, more existential solitude that wealth seemed only to amplify. Surrounded by luxury, I felt adrift, disconnected from the real people my friend would later mention. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Not just conventionally attractive, but the kind of beauty that possessed an almost magnetic quality, capable of halting conversations mid-sentence, causing heads to turn in unison. Her hair was a cascade of sun-kissed, blonde, her eyes a vibrant, intelligent green, and her smile radiated a warmth that seemed to promise sunshine and boundless life. Or at least, that was the carefully curated illusion I readily bought into. Our paths crossed at a charity gala, an event I had initially marked firmly in the avoid at all costs column of my social calendar. The thought of forced small talk and performative philanthropy held no appeal. However, a persistent friend, sensing my ennui, had practically dragged me there, insisting it would do me good to be around real people and pull me out of my self-imposed isolation. Reluctantly, I acquiesced, dressing in a rented tux, feeling utterly out of place amidst the glittering crowd. She had been standing near the bar, a focal point of a small, animated group, her laughter light and infectious. Her dress, a shimmering, sequined creation, caught the ambient light, making her seem to glow from within. It was cliché, almost ridiculously so, but in that crowded, noisy room, filled with 100 conversations vying for attention, our eyes somehow met. The moment felt undeniably cinematic, like a scene unfolding on a silver screen, complete with an imaginary swelling soundtrack. It was a powerful, instantaneous connection, and perhaps that should have been my first warning sign. Anything that feels too perfect, too much like a movie moment, usually exists only in fiction. We talked that night for what felt like hours, oblivious to the swirling party around us. The conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from shared literary tastes to long-held dreams and aspirations, to the pull of far-flung travel destinations. She spoke with a captivating sincerity about her desire to volunteer abroad, specifically mentioning a dream of teaching children in Africa, a selfless ambition that resonated deeply with my own burgeoning, if undefined, desire to make a positive impact with my wealth. I was utterly charmed. Who wouldn't be? She seemed intelligent, compassionate, beautiful, and fundamentally good. She wasn't intimidated by my success or my money. She seemed genuinely interested in me. Or so I believed. The courtship was a whirlwind, a heady rush of dates, late night, conversations that stretched into dawn, and a sense of undeniable chemistry. Every moment spent with her felt like stepping into a brighter, more vibrant world. She filled the void left by the intensity of my work, offering a warmth and connection I hadn't realized I was missing. The loneliness began to dissipate, replaced by the comforting presence of another person who seemed to understand and appreciate me. The thought of a future without her quickly became unimaginable. 1 year later, almost to the day we met, we were married. The wedding was a lavish affair, befitting my financial status, but for me it was secondary to the profound joy and certainty I felt about sharing my life with Sarah. Standing at the altar, watching her walk towards me, radiant and smiling, I truly believed I was the luckiest man in the world. At first, everything about our married life seemed idyllic, a perfect continuation of our charmed courtship. She was everything I thought I wanted in a partner, supportive of my need to decompress After years of intense work, endlessly kind and incredibly affectionate. In fact, her affection sometimes felt overwhelming, almost too much, a constant physical presence, a need for reassurance and closeness that, at the time, I interpreted as profound love. She actively encouraged me to embrace my wealth, to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor. She pushed me to relax, to stop thinking about work, and to fully step into the lifestyle my success afforded. Her encouragement often translated into urging me towards significant purchases, a sleek, ridiculously fast new Porsche that sat gleaming in the driveway, a sprawling vacation home overlooking the ocean that we barely used, and an increasingly extravagant anniversary party that seemed to escalate in scale each year. I justified these expenditures, telling myself that she simply wanted us to experience life fully, to make the most of our fortunate circumstances. I believed she was helping me shed the ingrained habits of a driven entrepreneur, someone accustomed to delayed gratification, and teaching me how to truly live in the present. But slowly, subtly, like hairline fractures appearing on a seemingly flawless surface, little cracks began to appear in the veneer of our perfect life. These were minor inconsistencies at first, easy to overlook or rationalize away. The most jarring was the complete absence of any follow-through on her earlier expressed desire to work or volunteer. Despite her passionate talk about teaching children, in Africa, she showed no inclination towards any form of employment or charitable work. When I gently broached the subject, suggesting she might find fulfillment in pursuing one of her interests now that finances weren't a concern, she would become vague or quickly change the subject. Her days seemed to consist primarily of leisure. She spent entire afternoons engaged in extensive shopping excursions, often with friends I had never met and whose existence I only learned about through her casual mentions. These shopping trips were less about necessity and more about the acquisition of luxury goods, the latest designer bags, shoes, and clothes arriving almost daily. When I inquired about who these friends were, her responses were often evasive, suggesting they were simply people I met or friends from before. Finances, a topic that was inherently central to our lives given my wealth, became a consistent point of tension. Any time I would try to discuss our joint accounts, our investments, or simply our spending habits, she would become instantly defensive, her earlier warmth replaced by a frosty iciness. It was as if the subject itself was an accusation, and she, always without fail, insisted on managing our finances through joint accounts. This seemed logical at first. We were married, after all. But as the cracks widened, I began to notice the imbalance. While I continued to be the sole source of income, the joint accounts were where the vast majority of our expenditures originated, and she never once contributed a single cent from any personal savings or earnings because there were none. I didn't want to accept what my gut was telling me. I desperately clung to the narrative I had built. She loves you. She just didn't grow up with money. She's not used to this kind of financial freedom. She's simply enjoying the security and the ability to finally have the things she always wanted. I told myself I was being cynical, judgmental, that my entrepreneurial instincts were making me overly suspicious. But deep down in the quietest corners of my mind, a cold, persistent whisper began to nag at me. It was a chilling question that refused to be silenced. What if you're not the object of her affection, but merely her ticket to the life she always wanted? What if you are just a means to an end? Still, I hesitated. The potential consequences of confronting her with such a devastating accusation, especially without concrete proof, were immense. Accusing your wife, the woman you vowed to spend your life with, of being a gold digger. That was the kind of conversation that could shatter a marriage irrevocably, leaving no possibility of repair, regardless of the truth. It was a line you couldn't uncross. So instead of confronting her directly, I waited. I watched her carefully, observing her reactions, her habits, her interactions. And I began to plan, slowly and meticulously, preparing for the possibility that my worst fears might be true. It felt like a clandestine operation within my own home, a surreal and painful duality where I played the loving husband by day and the wary investigator by night. The final straw, The undeniable confirmation of my growing suspicions arrived. On our second wedding anniversary, I had wanted to make it special, a romantic gesture that would remind us of the love I still desperately hoped was real. I had secretly organized a surprise trip to Italy, renting a magnificent private villa in Tuscany, complete with planned candlelit dinners overlooking rolling vineyards, private tours, and all the trappings of a romantic fantasy getaway. I had envisioned her face lighting up with joy and surprise when I presented the tickets. Her reaction, however, was a chillingly stark contrast to my expectations. When I enthusiastically showed her the carefully prepared itinerary and the first-class tickets, she barely managed a smile. Her expression quickly settled into a pout, a look of mild annoyance rather than delight. "Couldn't you have just given me the money instead?" she said, her voice laced with disappointment, not for the lack of a trip, but for the misallocation of funds. She didn't thank me for the thought, the planning, the expense. Her mind was already on something else. I could have used it to redo my closet. The casualness of her statement, the utter lack of appreciation for the experience I had planned, and the immediate focus on the monetary equivalent hit me like a physical blow. Something inside me didn't just freeze, it shattered. This wasn't disappointment over plans changing. This wasn't a preference for one type of gift over another. This was something raw and transactional. This was pure, unadulterated greed talking, a blatant disregard for the sentiment behind the gesture, reducing our anniversary celebration to a missed opportunity for financial gain. That night, lying awake next to her in the massive, opulent, king-size bed of our luxurious home, the silence between us thicker than any wall, the cold whisper in my mind solidified into a deafening roar. There was no longer any doubt. I needed to know the absolute, irrefutable truth. And if she was using me, if our entire relationship had been a calculated performance, then she was not under any circumstances going to get away with it. The passive waiting was over. It was time to act. I spent the next 2 months orchestrating my plan, setting the stage for her inevitable reveal. This period was one of intense emotional detachment, a deliberate separation of my feelings from my actions. I moved with quiet precision, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate but necessary operation. Step 1 was financial fortification. I quietly began restructuring my assets, moving significant portions of my wealth into a new complex trust that was explicitly structured to be inaccessible to her, even in the event of a divorce. I worked with my lawyers to ensure every legal loophole was closed, every contingency planned for. This was done with utmost secrecy. I made sure there were no unusual transactions or documents lying around that might pique her curiosity. Once my finances were secure, I initiated the second phase, the creation of a believable financial crisis. I started subtly, dropping hints about the market volatility affecting my investments, expressing concern about the performance of some of my portfolio. Then I escalated. I told her, with a carefully crafted expression of worry, that the company I had sold was facing unexpected legal challenges that might impact the payout structure, or that a major investment had gone sour. The details were vague enough to be plausible, but significant enough to suggest a substantial loss of fortune. I hinted, with feigned reluctance, that we might have to tighten our belts for a while, suggesting a reduction in our lavish spending, perhaps even needing to sell the vacation home or scale back on luxuries. Her reaction was not gradual. It was immediate and brutally revealing. The change in her demeanor was so abrupt, so stark, it was almost comical in its transparency, if it hadn't been so deeply painful. Overnight, the warmth vanished. She went completely cold. The spontaneous cuddles stopped entirely. The kisses she offered became perfunctory, brief pecks on the cheek or lips that lacked any genuine affection. The constant physical closeness that had once felt like love now felt like a switch had been flipped, exposing the transactional nature of her previous behavior. She started staying out late, offering flimsy excuses about catching up with friends. She no longer bothered to hide her phone or the notifications that flashed across the screen, texts from strange men, often accompanied by suggestive emojis or late-night timestamps. The pretense was dropped entirely. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. The sudden disappearance of my perceived wealth had extinguished her interest in me as a source of comfort or affection, and she was clearly exploring other avenues. But while I had my answer, confirmed by her blatant disregard for discretion and the swift withdrawal of her affection, I needed proof. Irrefutable visual proof. I needed something that would stand up in court, and more importantly, something that would leave no doubt in the minds of others about her true character. So, despite already knowing, I hired one anyway. A discreet, professional private investigator, known for their thoroughness and ability to work undetected. I provided him with Sarah's schedule, her usual haunts, and the name of a man I suspected she might be seeing, gleaned from one of the less than subtle texts I had glimpsed. 3. Weeks later, the report landed on my desk. It was a thick file filled with documentation, timestamps, and most damningly photographs. Photos that confirmed everything I suspected and more. Sarah not looking distressed or concerned about our supposed financial woes, but looking radiant and carefree, draped around a local real estate agent named Jordan. Photos of them laughing together at a poolside bar, of them kissing passionately outside a restaurant, of them disappearing into hotels, the camera strategically placed, capturing their illicit entrances without their knowledge, perhaps hidden in a parked car across the street. The narrative was undeniable. While I was supposedly facing financial ruin, she wasn't mourning our loss of fortune. She was actively shopping for her next meal ticket, hedging her bets, making sure her lavish lifestyle wouldn't be interrupted for long. At that point, I had all the evidence I needed. I could have chosen the quiet route. I could have simply filed for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, presented the evidence of infidelity privately to the court, and ended the marriage with minimal public fuss. It would have been cleaner, less dramatic, and arguably more dignified, but that wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not for the way she had systematically deceived and humiliated me. Not for the 2 years she had lied to my face, making a mockery of our vows and my genuine feelings. The pain of the betrayal was sharp, but the indignity of being so transparently used, so easily manipulated, fueled a different kind of fire. No, she needed to be exposed, publicly, irrefutably. Her carefully constructed facade needed to crumble in front of the very people she had likely boasted to about her successful conquest. The scale of her deception demanded a response proportionate to the offense. It was about justice, yes, but it was also about reclaiming my narrative, about showing everyone that I was not a fool, but someone who had been wronged and was unwilling to let it stand. So I set the final trap, the elaborate stage on which her performance would reach its ignominious end. The opportunity presented itself in the form of an invitation to a friends and family party, a seemingly casual wine and dine gathering hosted at a beautiful rented vineyard estate outside the city. Sarah received the invitation and perhaps, seeing it as an opportunity to network or gauge the financial health of the attendees, begged me to go. She claimed it would lift my spirits and take my mind off the supposed financial troubles. I agreed, perhaps with a little too much eagerness in my voice, which she, blinded by her own agenda, didn't notice. My heart hammered with a mixture of anticipation and cold resolve. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly have suspected, was that I had arranged everything. I had discreetly contacted the hosts, close friends who were fully aware of the situation and willing to help, and taken over the planning. The guest list, seemingly a mix of our mutual acquaintances, was carefully curated by me. It included our friends, yes, but also many of her friends, business acquaintances from various sectors, and, crucially, a few carefully selected, mutual strangers whom I had strategically placed throughout the venue with almost imperceptible hidden cameras. These weren't spies. They were simply individuals who understood the situation and were there to passively document the events, their presence adding an extra layer of authenticity to the gathering. The setting was perfect. The vineyard estate was picturesque. The atmosphere designed to be relaxed and disarming. The wine flowed freely, encouraging a sense of conviviality and loosening tongues. The mood was light, celebratory, leading everyone, especially Sarah, to believe this was just a normal, pleasant social event. Midway through the evening, When the conversations were flowing easily and the energy in the room was high, I made my move. I stood up from our table, walked to a central point in the gathering area, and tapped a wine glass gently with a spoon to command silence. The chatter gradually died down, and all eyes turned towards me, expectant smiles on their faces. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady and clear, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "It truly means a lot to have you all here. Tonight is special, not just for the beautiful setting or the wonderful company. Tonight we celebrate something fundamental, honesty. And," I added, allowing a small, perhaps slightly unsettling smile to touch my lips, "new beginnings." Sarah, standing near me, beamed. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. Perhaps I was about to announce that the financial crisis was averted, or even worse, in her mind, perhaps I was about to make a romantic public declaration, or even announce a pregnancy, some fairy tale moment that would solidify her position and quell any lingering doubts about our wealth. She was completely unprepared for the reality that was about to unfold. Instead of turning to her, I nodded almost imperceptibly to my friend Jason, who was positioned near a large projector screen we had discreetly set up near the vineyard entrance, ostensibly for a photo slideshow later in the evening. Jason, understanding his cue, pressed a button and the screen flickered to life. Footage began to roll, silent at first, then accompanied by a low ambient sound. The first clip showed Sarah laughing effortlessly with Jordan at a hotel pool, her body language intimate and relaxed. The next clip was a different location, a street outside a bar, showing them in a passionate kiss. The third clip was even more damning. Sarah and Jordan, late at night, slipping into a hotel room together, clearly not noticing the camera positioned across the street, capturing their clandestine arrival in unambiguous detail. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Conversations ceased entirely. The only sound was the faint ambient noise from the video, and suddenly the sharp, distinct shatter of a wine glass. Someone had dropped in shock. Sarah stood frozen beside me, her face undergoing a rapid, horrifying transformation. First, bleaching white as the blood drained from it, then blooming a vivid, angry red as the realization of her public exposure dawned on her. I waited for the silence to deepen, for the images to sink in. Then I spoke again, my voice cutting through the stunned air, each word carefully chosen, devoid of emotion, simply stating the facts. 2 years ago, I said, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd, landing briefly on Sarah's horrified expression. I married a woman who stood before me and said she loved me for who I was, for the person I was. Tonight, I paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. Tonight you have all learned, as I did, that she loved something else entirely. My eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, cold and unforgiving. Money. As if on cue, the next video started, this time with audio. It was a recorded phone call, obtained by the private investigator between Sarah and one of her friends. Likely one of the ones I had never met, someone she felt safe confiding in. Her voice, clear and distinct, filled the silence. In it, she was laughing, a cruel, dismissive sound, talking about how easy it had been to manipulate me, how naive I was, how she had planned from the beginning to marry into wealth. The most damning part was her casual discussion of her plans for the divorce, how she intended to bleed me dry, to take half of everything, to set herself up for life, if I ever somehow discovered her deception. That was the trigger. Sarah snapped. The carefully composed facade she had maintained for 2 years completely crumbled. She let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure rage and panic. She began to shriek accusations about betrayal, about privacy violations, about how I was a monster for doing this to her, throwing anything she could think of to deflect from the undeniable evidence on the screen. But it was too late. The words were futile, drowned out by the weight of what everyone had seen and heard. The truth, raw and undeniable, was laid bare for everyone to witness. No amount of screaming could erase the images or the recording. No PR stunt, no carefully crafted statement could fix this public humiliation. No tearful apology, no matter how convincing, could ever erase the cold calculation revealed in that phone call. Her friends, the ones she had likely confided in or bragged to, slowly turned away from her, their expressions ranging from shock to outright disgust. Her own family, who had been invited under the guise of celebrating our marriage, quietly, awkwardly gathered their things and began to leave, unable to bear witness to the disintegration of their daughter's life and reputation. And as for me, as Sarah continued to rage, alone in her self-made spotlight of shame, I simply walked away from that vineyard. I didn't need to say another word. I felt lighter than I had felt in years, a heavy burden of doubt and deception finally lifted from my shoulders. There was no triumph, no elation, just a profound sense of relief and a quiet, steely resolve for the future. The divorce that followed was swift and, for her, brutal. The prenuptial agreement I had insisted on, initially seen by Sarah as a minor inconvenience, proved to be an ironclad defense. This, combined with the overwhelming evidence of her infidelity and her explicit admission of fraudulent intent captured in the recorded phone call, left her with no legal standing. She walked away with absolutely nothing. No share of the house, no claim to the cars, no portion of my investments. The judge, presented with the undeniable facts of her calculated deception, not only denied her any form of alimony, but, in a rare move, ordered her to cover my legal fees as well, citing her malicious intent and the resources I had to expend to uncover her scheme. I heard later, through mutual acquaintances, that Jordan, the real estate agent who had been her potential next target, quickly dumped her once. It became clear she wouldn't be bringing a fortune with her. His interest, like hers, had clearly been purely transactional. Last I knew, she was working retail again, a stark contrast to the life of luxury she had briefly inhabited, living with her sister, still, apparently, blaming everyone but herself for the consequences of her actions. Sometimes I do think about Sarah, not with hatred or bitterness, not even with the sharp sting of anger that I felt in the immediate aftermath of the revelation. Those emotions have faded, replaced by something cooler, more detached. I think of her with a cold sort of gratitude. She was, in her own twisted way, a harsh but effective teacher. She taught me a valuable lesson that no amount of business success or financial security could impart. Never trust words without watching actions. People can say anything, paint any picture, but their true intentions are revealed in what they do, how they behave when faced with pressure or perceived opportunity. And sometimes, she also showed me, if you are patient enough, if you are willing to wait and observe and plan, karma isn't just a passive force. Sometimes, just sometimes, it lets you deliver the justice yourself, closing the loop and reclaiming a sense of control and dignity that had been stolen.